welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues. Tonight, with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Name, we're discussing horrible things said against the non-Jew, Part 3. So, Rabbi, welcome back. You may talk.
Yeah, I hear you.
Good deal. Welcome back, Rabbi. So, all right, good deal. Good that we're covering all this stuff. There's so many negative things that just keeps being tossed in and around and about regarding the Talmud. So it's good having the answers come from the source. Get the get straight from the source, and that's what we want. So very good, sir. Welcome back.
Always a pleasure. We've hit this topic a few different things, a bunch of different, ideas. And as we always say, everything over here, is in context. And if you don't look at it in context, which, a lot of Christians, Messianics, whatever you want to call them, don't, then when you take things out of context, what happens? Mm-hmm. So these statements look, they seem to look really bad. And people can say, well, you give an answer, you say, well, the rabbis say like this, or comes out like this, or it's a technical issue. So that's all great, but they say, I don't like that answer, or I don't like this answer. Well, it doesn't matter. You like the answer. You don't like the answer. The rabbis didn't give all the answers, right? In other words, they didn't give all the reasons for why things may be permitted, may be permissible. Right? They said, we say that this is a reason, not necessarily the reason. Right? And again, some things maybe been said at a certain time. Right? In other words, we're gonna see now maybe something at a certain time. But throughout time maybe it doesn't apply. Right? So we'll just jump in. It says in we'll hit this topic now. That it says in Avodah Zarah 22a to 22b, the Gemara says that non-Jews are suspect on bestiality. Now we know that the Torah, book of Leviticus, chapter 18, I think verse 22, 21, 22, over there where it speaks about homosexuality, also speaks about bestiality. Now, over there, it's talking about forbidden relationships, right? Forbidden relationships for Jews. And the question is, by non-Jews, do things apply? Let's say for Noahites, things that are going to apply are things that make sense logically according to the Torah, right? So now, if that's the case, and it's logic according to the Torah, does this apply? Is this going to apply or not to non-Jews? So the Gemara says, non-Jews are suspect on bestiality. Now, interesting, why? Why does the Gemara say such a thing? Certainly, it was common practice to stable animals with non-Jews. A Jew comes in, they leave their animals. Let's say they came into town, and they would leave their animals, let's say, with idolaters. And it was common for them to be involved, in bestiality. Now, some people may say bestiality today may not be so in vogue. I mean, it's on the books. Torah says it's forbidden, right? Certainly for Jews. So there are people that, certainly that do such a thing, right? So here, though, you're gonna say, what? All non-Jews, are suspect on bestiality. Sounds kind of harsh. But first of all, when you look at this piece of Talmud, you have to realize, again, looking at it in context, this is a minority opinion. The minority opinion we don't hold like, right? Or you can tell me it was limited to a specific time and a place where that was the case. In other words, the rabbis could have said, well, this is the case. You know why? It's the case because that's what was going on at the time. That was something that was very common. Oh, that's a terrible thing to say. How could you say such a thing? Hate non-Jews. You say, oh, what do you think? That's all they do all day is, they're suspect with animals. That's what they do. Well, that was common. It was common during that time period. So they're commenting on what's going on, in their time period. So either you tell me Either you tell me such a case was a minority opinion, or you tell me it's a place where it was common, right? It was definitely common. Others say it was so widespread, they were suspect on animals everywhere, not just where they lived. So again, that's calling it is what it is. That's another reason that it was just so widespread. Now, if you flip the page, you look at Avodah Zarah 22b, it speaks a lot about immorality, right? Immorality of non-Jews, immorality of idol worshippers. Now, they often committed adultery, and the Gemara goes further, which now is going to have to be clarified, because people are going to get totally outraged, I'm sure. That's why we do these shows. And the Gemara says that his wife's not available. She went out, or she can't be with him, whatever the case is. Then what are we worried about? We're worried about that he may find a Jew's animal and sodomize it. Now you're going to say, if this idolater, this non-Jew, cannot be, with his wife for whatever reason, well, what's he going to do? He's not going to ruin his own animal. Oh, that we're going to see. He doesn't want to, ruin his own animal, so to speak. So he'll take a Jew's animal. He'll sodomize a Jew's animal. Now, what's the $1.5 million? See, we up the ante a little bit because all prices are up. What's the $1.5 million question? Why would a non-Jew prefer a Jew's animal, over his own, right? So, all right, we already answered part of that. Doesn't want to ruin his own animal, but the rabbis learn from the impurity of what happened with the snake, right? Snake in the Garden of Eden. Snake, the sly, right? He's more sly than any other animal. And he caused Eve and convinced her to eat from the tree of knowledge. And that caused death to the world. So God punished man, God punished the snake, and we have death today. Death, not a Jewish concept, never should have been death in the world. But God had to go to plan B. God understand man could have done this. And because of the sin of the snake, so we have death in the world. So the rabbis learned that this impurity, what we call zehuma, is removed from the Jewish people. When does that happen? When do we get rid of this evil inclination, so to speak? That all disappears by giving the Torah at Mount Sinai. Right? Now I have to remember, we'll give a little bit of background here, that before Mount Sinai, what happened? The snake, causes a sin. The world goes down, death is brought to the world. Now, the world later, right, generations later, gets back, and that's what we're, trying to do, and that's what the Messiah is going to do eventually, when the Messiah comes, is to bring the world back to where it was before Adam and Eve ate from the tree. Now, there have been great people, throughout history, trying to fix up that sin, right? We see by Noah, for instance. What did Noah do after the flood? He had a vineyard, right? And he got plastered, and we know what happened. We know what happened afterwards. But commentaries ask the question, what in the world is going on? Why in the world after the flood?
You just haven't read the report.
After the flood itself, what does he do? He gets plastered. Right? He gets drunk over here. So there's a whole issue. Why he does such a thing. So the commentaries say, what was the tree of knowledge? So some say the tree was wheat. Some say it was a fig tree. Some say it was a grapevine. Interesting enough, with all the answers that are given, what type of tree it was, nobody says it was an apple tree. I don't know exactly where an apple tree came from, wherever that idea came from.
After saving with customized corners,
certainly brought down, in the Torah or anywhere else that says such a thing. But okay, but there are opinions as the Talmud says, there's an opinion, there's a grapevine. Right? So they took leaves from the grapevine, covered themselves up. But why? So Noach over here, what does he do? So he plants a vineyard. You would think, there are a number of possible reasons why he might have done such a thing. But one possible reason is because what did Adam and Eve sin with? They when they ate from the tree of knowledge with the grapevine, right? So they ate grapes. So Noah comes along and says, you know what? I understand what they did. They brought death to the world, so I'm going to try and fix it. How am I going to try and fix it? I'm going to have this vineyard, right? I'm going to grow this vineyard, and I'm going to take the grapes, and I'm going to sanctify the grapes. And I'm going to sanctify the grapes to the best of my ability, and I'm going to fix this up, right? He failed. Others, throughout history, also failed. They could have been the Messiah, and they didn't for different reasons. Definitely not the topic for now. But the point is, the Jews got to Mount Sinai. What happened at Mount Sinai? Jews got the Torah. Jews reached the highest spiritual level and brought up the world to the highest spiritual level at that time, till that Adam and Eve ate from the tree. So now Mr. S, the Sultan, whatever you want to call him, the evil inclination, the angel of death, what does he do? He sees that Jewish people come and accept the Torah. The world at an incredibly high level, at the same level now as what happened with Adam and Eve before they sinned. So now Jewish people can go straight into the land of Israel. That's going to be the end of Mr. S. And what does he do? He causes the sin of the golden calf. Right? He shows a picture to the people. Moshe Rabbeinu gets delayed, or they think he gets delayed, coming back. And what happens? They made a mistake. And they say, where's Moshe? What happened to him? Maybe he died, etc. So Mr. S over here shows the picture, the Medrash says, of Moshe Rabbeinu in a coffin. So then they say, we want an intermediary, and whatever. And that's the whole sin of the golden calf. That brings the world back to where it was. And we're still paying that price today, right? So the rabbis learn over here that the snake, what happens? He gets his legs cut off. He's got food to eat for the rest of his life. God doesn't want to have any connection, right? Certainly to the snake. And the snake seemingly gets removed, right? He gets taken out over here. Why? Because this is what the Haggadah says. This is what the Haggadah says on Passover. That the Haggadah says there are 15 different things that the Haggadah says, if God would have done this, Dayenu, it would have been enough. If God would have done this, it would have been enough. So the Haggadah says, had God brought us to Mount Sinai without giving us the Torah, it would have been enough. Now, there's an obvious question. And the question is, what in the world would we have gained by being brought to Mount Sinai? No Torah. The world stands. Right? The world stands for the sake that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. That's why it says in the book of Genesis, when it goes through creation, it says day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. It gets to day 6. What does the Torah tell me? It says that God rested on the 6th. It was morning and evening, the 6th day. Right? Yom HaShishi. Right? I'll give a little bit of Hebrew here. The 6th day. Every other day is first day, second day, third day. What do you mean, the 6th day? So Rashi says, what does the 6th day represent? What is the 6th? The 6th represents the 6th of Sivan. What is the 6th of Sivan? Or the 7th of Sivan, some say. That was the day God gave the Torah to Mount Sinai. So God made a condition with creation, and God said, guess what? I'm gonna put everything in suspended animation. I'm not gonna solidify everything until I see in history someone's gonna accept the Torah. Oh, who's gonna accept the Torah? Who's gonna do such a thing? The Jews. How do I know? Because of the 6th of Sivan. Now, if that's true, and the Jews are going to accept the Torah, why in the world would God bring them to Mount Sinai, as the Haggadah says, without receiving the Torah? That wouldn't make any sense. But the Haggadah says, had Hashem brought us to Mount Sinai, didn't give us the Torah, would have been enough. What do you mean it would have been enough? There's no Torah. Why would God bring us to the mountain for nothing? Right? So the answer is standing at Mount Sinai, even without receiving the Torah. We have to remember that when they stood at Mount Sinai, and they heard the thunder, the lightning. They saw it, tremendously afraid. But the Gemara says that a non-Jewish maidservant saw more at Mount Sinai than the prophet Ezekiel saw in his lifetime. Right? That was an unbelievable thing that's obviously never been duplicated in history. Right? That God came to a nation, spoke to a whole nation. You can't make that up. We know that's not a big game of telephone, which we've spoken about because generation after generation. Right? We go have a Passover Seder, and the great-grandfather is a grandfather, a father, and a son. And the story is told what happened. Right? What happened in Egypt and what happened the Jews getting in the Torah. So over here, why would be standing at Mount Sinai? Why would that help? Why would that help even without receiving the Torah? Because the fact is, even if they just stood there, the holiness was so great. Remember, they couldn't go on the mountain, or they couldn't go so far on the mountain. There were things they weren't allowed to do because it's such a holy experience. Right? When God spoke the first of the 10 Commandments, or some say the first 2 of the 10 Commandments, to the Jewish people, the experience was so great they died. God had to bring them back to life. Now, it's difference of opinion among the commentators. Some say they were all 10 commandments. They died, came back to life, or it was only the first 2. Right? It was only the first 2 of the 10 commandments, and then after that, they said, "Wow, it's much too great of an experience." So they said to Moshe, we don't want to die, come back to life. So you hear what God says. And you tell us. So by standing at Mount Sinai, even without giving of the Torah, it's going to accomplish the removal of this impurity, of this, zuma, as we call it. Now, someone's going to ask, what does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with bestiality, right, over here? So here, the non-Jew, another reason, that the non-Jew is going to stay away from his animal. Because when a person is with their animal, he can cause it damage. What's the damage it can cause? It can cause it to be barren. Right? It causes it to be barren. So, I'm not going to ruin. So what are they going to say? They'll say, I'm not going to ruin my own animal. I'm going to use the Jews. I'll ruin his animal. What's the difference? But this impurity, right, this zehuma, as it is known, is an absolute heightened level of lust. Right? Again, it's one of the strongest impulses, certainly that a person has. Jew or non-Jew, doesn't matter, but it has to be harnessed. It has to be used in the right way. Over here, a non-Jew is so overcome with lust that he desires even animals. Someone's going to say, but isn't that an unnatural thing? Seemingly it's an unnatural thing. Homosexuality, regardless of what people are going to say, is an unnatural thing. Right? What does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me God's going to find a helpmate for Adam. Who is that? That's going to be Eve. And he says a husband is going to cling to his wife. So you can say, well, that's before the Torah is given. Right? Maybe after the Torah is given, maybe that's going to be different. Maybe he's going to cling to other things. And the answer is no. Because we see homosexuality forbidden. Right? Next verse, bestiality, going to be forbidden over here. So a non-Jew, we can say a Jew over here also, but here, the Gemara says, we're talking about a non-Jew, right? But the point is that there's a heightened level, an unbelievably heightened level of lust over here. So a non-Jew could be so overcome that he's going to desire even animals, even if it's something so unnatural, but you know what? He's out of control. Person, totally out of control. So when the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai, and God revealed himself to them again, no other so-called religion makes such a claim. So God revealed himself to Jewish people, unbelievable level of holiness the world has never seen since. So that awe of God and what happened at Mount Sinai weakened their lust. It weakened it, making it more controllable. And that's how it was removed. Now again, doesn't mean we don't have, a strong desire, for such a thing. The desire's there. There's no question. But you know what? it's not as strong as maybe by non-Jews. That they have a heightened level. By Jews, we also have, it's still also a very strong impulse, not the same. Now, the other question here is, even if we say, okay, it's a heightened level of lust, why would a non-Jew prefer an animal to his wife? I mean, how desperate are we going to get over here? Now, there is a principle. The Gemara in Nedarim 91b tells me through the end of the tractate, and it tells me a verse in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 17. What does it say over there? It says, Mayim genuvim yimtaku, meaning taking what one is not allowed to do or to have. What does it do? It provides more physical pleasure. Now, over there, it's talking about an adulterous relationship. And an adulterous relationship, what's going to happen? Two people are going to desire each other, and the desire is going to be unbelievably strong. It's going to be unbelievably strong. Why? Because you can't have the other person. The other person's married, or the other person's with somebody else. Obviously making it forbidden, right? It would be forbidden, for non-Jews as well, right? Adultery would be forbidden, one of the Noahide laws. But if it's something you can't have, then that's what somebody wants. The question comes up, a lot, that people will say, or let's say better, non-Jews will say, I want to learn Gemara. And, if Jews can learn it, I should also, be able to learn it. Now, there are different reasons, why it's certainly not good for a non-Jew to learn it. Certainly not on their own. No question, even a Jew should not learn it on their own. They have to have a teacher. If they don't have a teacher, it's going to be extremely hard, if not almost impossible, for them to go through, even if it's translated in a language, they understand. Just as a side point, they translated the Gemara into Korean. Koreans say, well, Jews have done so many great things, throughout the millennium, and their claim is, it's because of the Talmud. So they say, well, we also want to learn it. We also want to get the wisdom. So, a person can get wisdom, but obviously, there are certain things, that you have to be taught. You can't just learn it on your own, even in your own language. But what's the point? So the point is, if you tell someone, listen, this is something absolutely forbidden. This is something you should never tap into. This is something, it's going to turn your life upside down and all that. What's the person going to say? Great! When do we start learning? That's what they want to learn. Why? Because it's forbidden fruit. Right? Certainly King Solomon understood, forbidden fruit is much sweeter. It's something over here, as we said, that if it's something you don't have or you're not allowed to have, then that is for sure going to provide more physical pleasure. And that we can understand, right? Certainly, the example, over here is by adultery. Two people can't be together. They sneak around, they this, they that, whatever it is, it makes it more enjoyable, right? Now imagine, those people that are with other people. So let's say they get divorced, they leave the other person, and then, they get together. It's not always the same, right? And it could very well be that relationship goes sour. Why? Because that relationship was only strong because it was the heat of the moment, right? It was something forbidden. So with something forbidden, it makes it much more desirable. The fact that it makes it much more desirable, it's more exciting. But now it's permissible, right? Let's say now it's permissible. Not so exciting anymore. So that could be. So that could be over here. Even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, why a non-Jew would do this. But again, he doesn't want to ruin his own animal. True. Right? But so what will we do? He'll use someone else's that really he's not allowed to. Right? So it makes it, in a certain way, more understandable why we do such a thing. Now, another question over here is, what is this zehuma? What is this impurity? Sounds like, such an unbelievable, powerful thing. And like it's almost, impossible to fight against, right? So the Rambam explains in the Guide for the Perplexed, chapter 230 over there, what the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, not so in vogue today. There's an English translation. But you have to understand it was a philosophical book. It was written in Arabic, translated into Hebrew, and then translated into English. And the Rambam wrote this in order to explain, different reasons for, the mitzvahs in the Torah, try and come up with, explanations of why we do, certain mitzvahs, etc. in the Torah. And the reason, because there are a lot of Jews, unfortunately, were going after secular philosophy, right? They got into Socrates, Aristotle, etc. So he wrote this whole magnum opus in order to answer up secular philosophy. Now, today, how many people really, reading this book at all, right? Not too many people, because people are not interested, in philosophy, most people, right? They care less about philosophy. They want to do whatever they want to do. And for them, it doesn't matter. For them, it's just, I don't care. You want to tell me the Torah is true? You want to tell me you can prove it? It doesn't really matter. I'm going to do what I do anyway. So, it's all about desire. It's all about what a person wants to do. It had nothing to do with philosophy, right? So this book, sort of extinct. I mean, again, I'm not saying people can't learn it, etc. But, this is what the Rambam, this is why he wrote it. This is what the purpose is. So in this case, the Rambam tries to understand what exactly Zehuma is, what this impurity is. And he brings down a medrash. And he brings down a medrash and explains that it was not the snake necessarily that seduced Eve. What was going on? Right? We have to understand also, snake was a great helpmate for mankind before he had his legs chopped off. Etc. And, he seduced Eve. That's the way it looks. That's exactly what the Torah seems to say. He spoke to Eve. She understood what he said. And she tries to seduce him over here, right? Because, he understands if Adam dies, he can take Eve for himself, so to speak. So what happened? So who's this snake over here, right? Well, what's going on over here? So he brings down a medrash. And he says, the medrash explains, it was not the snake that seduced Eve, but what happens? Rather, Mr. S, the Satan, the evil inclination, angel of death, whatever you want to call him, right? Now, again, he's a messenger. He's a messenger. He's an angel. He cannot do anything outside of what God doesn't, he can't kill people if God doesn't say, to do it. But he causes people to sin. That's his job, right? Does a great job. Doesn't need me to agree with him. Does a tremendous job trying to convince people to sin. That's what he wants. So what does Satan do? Right? What did Mr. S over here do? He sort of, quote unquote, he rode upon the snake. So how'd the snake be able to speak? Right? Animals do speak, even though we're not Dr. Doodle. We don't speak to the animals. Animals have their own language. It used to be there were great people that could understand, the language of the animals. Gemara already says, talks about people understood, let's say, the language, language of the birds, etc. So what happened over here? So Mr. S rode upon the snake. So I guess we'd say he was the voice. Maybe he's the voice of the snake. And he convinced Eve. He convinced Eve over here. So this is what the rabbis mean when they say the snake seduced her and infused her with this impurity, with this zehuma, which remained in her and descended until the Jewish people got to Mount Sinai, right? Which we spoke about. Jewish people get to Mount Sinai, even if they wouldn't have got the Torah. That impurity, gone. Totally disappears until the sin of the golden calf. And then that explains what the verse means when it says, which is a very strange statement over here, that the Torah makes, that the Torah says that man overcomes the snake. How does he overcome the snake? He overcomes the snake by crushing its heads, and the snake overcomes man by biting his heel. Well, what in the world, does that mean? Even at face value. We overcome the snake by crushing its head, right? How do you stop a snake, right? Either, you grab it by the tail, so to speak, right? But it's not going to help because the snake can turn around and try and bite you. Grab it by the head, right? You're gonna stop it, by crushing its head. And what does the snake do? What does the snake do over here to try and get the man? Bites him, right? Where's he going to bite him? Can bite him all over, right? But they're going to bite him in the heel. But, that could be maybe, quote unquote, a literal interpretation here. But what's behind what's going on? So what does the heel represent? The heel represents the lowliest, most mundane part of a person. In other words, what do I use the heel for? Stand up, to be able to walk. The lowest part of the body. It's not like, it's so strong. Let's say like a person's hand or something like that, even though you could say, wow, you could use your foot. You could kick someone really hard, cause a lot of damage, right? That's true. But in general, when you look at the body from top to bottom, what is the lowest part of the body? That's the heel. So comes along Mr. S. Mr. S comes along and he seduces a person. Why? How? By attracting them to a physical lust, to a desire for worldly pleasures. That's the world we live in. The Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, says in the way of God, we're in this world, and it's a world of distraction, right? It's a world of desire. It's a world of pleasure. It's a world that the body wants. The body wants to go after, physicality in this world. We're created, everybody, right? Jew or non-Jew, created from the dust of the four corners of the earth. We are physical beings. Just so happens we have a spiritual soul. Everybody, Jew and non-Jew, we all have a spiritual soul. That's what, keeps us alive, so to speak. But there's a conflict. There's a conflict between body and soul. Body wants to go after physicality. Soul wants to go for spirituality. There's always a conflict, right? So when the soul does the right thing, makes blessings, keeps Torah and mitzvahs, even as a non-Jew, right? Whatever they're obligated in. So what's the soul going to do? It's going to elevate the body, elevate the soul. But if you let the body take over, and the body gives in to desires, then the body is going to debase the body and the soul. So there's always a constant struggle. Tremendous struggle. So comes along Mr. S, and he seduces the person by attracting him through physical lusts, right? One of the strongest impulses we have, and desire for worldly pleasures, because isn't that what everyone lives for? We live in a messed up world, totally messed up world, in so many different ways, and we messed it up. And someone asked me in my Q&A yesterday or today for most people, and the question was, did God make an imperfect world? Right? And what was it? What was the simple answer that I gave it? The answer is no. God made a perfect world, and we see, you see animals program DNA. You see what goes on. The fact that the Earth is on a certain orbit, doesn't get too close to the sun, doesn't get too far back. Otherwise, either we'd be incinerated or would be a frozen tundra like Pluto, even though Pluto got demoted as a planet. Right? Regardless, we see the human body. We see a world by design. Certainly, as Abraham said, you look at a world of design, in all that. So great. So we can see all that. We can understand all that, at least, in our minds. But what happens? The person gets overcome, by worldly desires, by worldly pleasures. And the only antidote, as the Gemara in Kedushin says, that the Gemara asks that the fact that we have an evil inclination, how do we overcome the evil inclination? So the Gemara says, I made an antidote. What's the antidote to the evil inclination? It's Torah. So even though we're attracted by worldly pleasures, and even though this is, one of the strongest impulses the person has, so the Torah tells me how to use it. Right? I can't just, be with a woman, even she's your spouse, whenever you want, certainly for Jews, right? That we've spoken about. It has to be harnessed. It has to be used the right way. So what does man do over here? Man has to use their heads to overcome these lusts. Why? Because what does the Torah say? Torah says that in the Shema, in the third paragraph of the Shema, the Torah says I'm not allowed to go after, after my eyes and after my heart. Now, the mind can know the right thing to do, and I think in this generation, in order to do the right thing, 99%, I would say, of the game is knowing what to do. The last 1% is okay implementing what you have to do. But the mind, there's always a mind-heart disconnect. I would always say we can, to know what to do, that we can find out, that we can learn. Doing it, that's a whole different thing, right? It's a much harder thing. So the point is that man has to use his mind, right, to overcome the evil inclination. Evil inclination never rests, 24/7. He keeps going and going and going in order to get us to sin. The reality is, we have to think of ways to overcome him. We can't just say, well, this is the way I am. This is what goes on. This is what happens. And that's it. I can't change. It's too hard to change. Yeah, it is. But we have to realize the more a person does something and doing it, it becomes part of them. It becomes second nature. It could be something minor. It doesn't have to be necessarily something major. But it becomes part of them. Once it becomes part of their psyche, you keep doing it over and over again, it's difficult to stop. Totally difficult to stop. Right? You take someone who smokes. Right? Someone who smokes, you'll tell me, well, that's not a fair comparison. Because someone smokes, there's nicotine. Nicotine's addictive. True. But there are certain things that a person does, or probably many things. We're a creature of habit. We do certain things on a regular basis. And when it comes to bad character traits, it's hard. It's hard to change. Even as Rabbi Stuart Federow, the head founder of the Musar movement, said, more than 150 years ago, 200 years ago, to change one character trait in a person's life, just one, is a very difficult thing. But he can't say, well, it's so hard, I'm just going to give up. Yeah, that's what the evil inclination will say. But we have to use our heads. We have to use our minds, right, to overcome, these lusts. Animals don't have that. Animals are programmed DNA, right? They act on what their nature tells them to do. Now, man, the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, we'll quote this again, that the Ramchal says man is the only being in the world that has the ability to affect others. Animals, in general, they don't affect others. Now, it could be, animals could cause damage to humans. They could, God forbid, kill humans, in different ways here. Every year hear about alligators, killing someone or, other animals potentially. So God is using them, as a messenger, right? God's got many messengers. He wants to take a person out of this world, right? Many different ways, many different things, that he can use at his ability, in order to do that. But does that mean, animals are going to act necessarily outside of their nature to do it? No, because animals only have one aspect of the soul. That's what we call the nefesh behemoth. That's the animalistic soul. The animalistic soul, okay, everybody, right? Jews, non-Jews, we all have that part of the soul as well. So it doesn't mean I have to act on it, all the time, depending on what it is. But okay, we have to use, as we mentioned, we have to use our heads, we have to use our minds to overcome these lusts. So now, how do we overcome Mr. S, the evil inclination? What do? We crush it by his head. Why by the head? What does the head represent over here? The head of Mr. S represents arrogance, which arouses within a person his physical lusts. Comes along the Orchos Tzadikim in the ways of the righteous. The ways of the righteous, the very beginning, in the gate of conceitedness, right? And Shar Gaiva, which is known as being haughty, being conceited. So, where do they stem from? What's the main cause? Arrogance. That's where it is. It's an arrogance. So, the head of a person, right? A person, let's say they have a high IQ and they've done this, and they've done that, and they're brilliant and whatever, what can that lead to? And everyone's going to tell them how great they are, and they wrote books, and they're this, and scientific this, and whatever, beautiful. What's that going to do? It's going to give a person, it's going to make a person arrogant. Now, it's going to make everybody arrogant. We're not going to go that far. We're not going to say everybody, has got certain knowledge or does certain things, going to make them arrogant, so to speak. It's going to depend on the person, right? But where does arrogance start? It starts in the mind. I think I'm better than you, right? Or they want to make themselves look better than someone else. And that's what Lashon Hara is. When a person speaks badly against someone else, for a Jew it's forbidden. Speak badly against someone else, even if it's true, right, in general. Now, it's interesting. A person, God forbid, speaks Lashon Hara. What happens? What happens? They speak Lashon Hara. What do they have in their hand? If a person sinned and they stole something from someone else, they have something in their hands, right? If a person speaks Lashon Hara, speaks badly against someone else, what do they have in their hand? Nothing, right? But they demolish a person. They make the other person look bad. Why? Because they want to make themselves look good. So how do I make myself look good? I lie, or even if I tell the truth, doesn't matter, right? If I lie, it's definitely worse. But you make someone look bad by what they've done, whether it's true or not, again, doesn't matter. But you're making yourself look better in the process. I don't have anything in my hand. That's not something tangible. That's not something I can take to the bank and cash it in, right? But also, it's also about arrogance, thinking I'm better than someone else. What makes you any better, right? Imagine a person thinks they're God's gift to the world, and they're, this person beneath me, this, that. So I will remind everyone, I'm not going to get gross over here. Don't want to get you banned on YouTube or anywhere else, right? But imagine, that person ate something and, whatever, and, they go to the bathroom to do what they need to do. Does that make them any better than anyone else? The food's going in the same place, right? It's going to come out the same place. You're going to say, oh, come on, that's gross, whatever. Yeah, it's a natural thing. And it's certainly a natural thing, but, someone's going to be more arrogant. They're going to say, oh, I'm so much better. Really? I'd like to, be a fly on the wall, when you enter the right restroom, right? We'll keep it clean here. You go to the bathroom. Yeah, I want to be a fly on the wall and see, and see how much better you are than anybody else. You're no different. No different over here. So the head of a person, so what are we going to do? We're going to crush Satan. We're going to crush him by his heads, which refers to arrogance, as we mentioned. And why does it say a man's heel? Oh, we said the lowest part of the body, right? That represents his lowliness, his mundane qualities, right? That can be used for his benefits or detriment, right? We can use this world against what the Christians say, that everything's bad and everything's evil and this and that. We can take this world and sanctify it. Even the most mundane things. Person can take an apple. A Jew can take an apple, make a blessing on an apple, sanctify the apple for the sake of eating, right? It's a tremendous thing. So we can even do something that's mundane and elevate it, right? Or we can do something mundane and be no different than animals. And be absolutely no different than animals. Be exactly the same, right? That's why the Torah says, when is mankind created? After animals. If we do what we're supposed to do, we elevate ourselves to higher spiritual levels, then we're the pinnacle of creation. Then we're the essence of what creation is. Very good. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, right, and we act like animals, then animals are even better than us. You know why they're better than us? Because they were created first. So it's a catch-22 the way you want to look at it, right? So in such a way, we can either use these mundane qualities for good things, or God forbid, for bad things. Now, if a person allows the arrogance over here, of Mr. S to fulfill himself with lust of worldly pleasures, what is it going to do? It's going to bring him down a slippery slope. That's what it's going to do. It's going to cause his downfall, right? And we see it over and over and over. all throughout the news, all throughout history. You know, you had people that got carried away, whether in business, you know, sexual improprieties, you know, other things. And these things for, you know, quest for power and ego and all these things destroy a person. 100% will cause their downfall. And the question only is, you know, is a matter of when, unless the person's in control, unless you have that anchor. If you have the Torah's anchor, you know, you have the Torah's the anchor. Okay, so now there's accountability. And we have to be careful. We have to be careful what we see. We have to be careful what we do, right? If, on the other hand, lowliness arouses within himself a sense of modesty, and he sees how low he is, he sees how great God is, he sees what his obligation is in the world, then he's able to overcome the attempt of the snake to seduce him and crush his arrogance. Now you're going to say, but it doesn't always work, does it? We fail many times. You know, the evil inclination has a field day, and he does a great job, as we mentioned. I don't have to agree. You know, he doesn't need me to agree with him over here. But again, we have ups and downs. Life is a constant struggle. So we always have to try and be in control, right, as much as possible. That's why we have to constantly learn. That's why we have to constantly learn Musar, you know, in ethics, to realize, you know, we think, oh, fame, right? You know, I'm going to live forever. Yeah, we think we're so great. We've done this, we've done that. And the reality is we're an infinitesimally small speck of cosmic dust, if you think about it. I live in a town, in a city, in a state, you know, on a continent, in a country, in a continent, on a planet, getting smaller, in a galaxy, getting smaller. So I think I'm God's gift to the world. Let's look at the bigger picture. Yeah, you know, we think we run the world, we do this, we do that. The reality is we're not. There's so many things we're not in control, right? And in the story I mentioned before, you know, the doctor thought, you know, he's in control, you know, station, you know, you got to go when you got to go, and he runs out in embarrassment, and God knocked him down. He said, "You think you're in control? You really think you're in control? You can't even control your body. You can't control your own bowel movements, for goodness sakes. You want to tell me you're in control, right? So God will take someone who's arrogant, you know, build them up, and then he's going to cut them down, right? Totally cut them down to overcome what the snake wants, you know, what the snake does. The Rambam adds over here, interesting enough, if you take the word Satan, right, he says the word Satan and the word snake, what do they refer to? They refer to the same thing. They refer to Mr. S, it's all one thing, which means that the Nachash, as the Torah calls it, right, which we understand, you know, it's a snake. What's it related to? What words? You know, what word is it related to? Right, it's related to the word nechoshes. Right, what does the word nechoshes mean? Nechoshes means it's a metal. That's what it means. It's a metal. What does the metal over here represent? Arrogance, brazenness. And who do we know that's referred to the beginning of the nations? Amalek. Right, Numbers chapter 24, verse 20. What is Amalek compared to? They're like the head of a snake. Most arrogant of the nations, who try to arouse the other nations to sin. What do they bring to the world? They brought to the world there's no such thing as supernatural. Imagine the Jews are on the greatest roll of their lives. You know, they come out of Egypt, decimate Egypt. They come to Mount Sinai. God gives them the Torah, miracles in the desert, and comes along this nation, the nation of Amalek. What do? They want to go to war with the Jewish people. Now, I would tell you, come on. You're talking about a nation been on the biggest roll of their lives. If they're on the biggest roll of their lives, what in the world are you doing trying to fight them? So they give a mashal, a parable. And they say, you know, it's like someone jumps into to a boiling hot cauldron, right? What's going to happen? They're going to die. They're going to get burnt, right? Second person, same thing. Third person, same thing. But what are they doing in the process? They're cooling down the water. So when eventually the water's going to get cooled down, but you're going to have a lot of sacrifices over here. A lot of people are going to die. So they thought, okay, you know, maybe a lot of us are going to die and this and that, but you know what? We want to get the Jews to sin, right? We want to knock them off over here. right? So they arouse other nations to sin. And they themselves, even though we don't know who Amalek is today, right? Many say that the Germans during World War II certainly had the status of Amalek in their cruelty or whatever. But what did they bring to the world? Atheism. That's what they brought to the world. Still very much in vogue. No question about it. And that's what destroyed, Haman himself in the book of Esther. Because, as the Gemara says, he gets pinned down on Esther's couch. Achashverosh walks in and is like, what? You're going to try and take my wife in front of my face? So what happens? God opens his eyes and he shows Haman that is being pinned down by angels. Now, who did Haman come from? Amalek. Amalek doesn't believe in the supernatural. So what's he going to say? He can't open his mouth there. Because what's he going to say? I'm being pinned down by angels? They're holding me down. I can't get up. I'm trying to get up, but I can't. What would Achashverosh say? What are you kidding? You're Amalek. You don't believe in this. Right? And that's his end. Right? And then he ends up getting killed over here. So that whole idea has to be destroyed. Right? Just like man has to crush the head of the snake, right? In order to overcome Mr. S. It all starts from the mind. The ability to overcome, right? The ability to overcome this evil inclination. And to overcome this impurity. So now the Zahuma, this impurity of the snake, and Mount Sinai gets removed. How does it get removed? God appeared. Right? Greatest single revelation in the history of man. God appeared. Even if he didn't give him the Torah. Right? He appeared, wiped it out. And that's going to happen. The evil inclination, Mr. S, on his last legs right now. And he knows that because the Messiah is right around the corner. Many, many signs that the Messiah is right around the corner. He knows when the Messiah comes, he's finished. His job's over. So the purpose of Hashem's revelation over here to the Jewish people was that they should acquire this trait of what? Of bashfulness. One of the character traits of a Jew. That they're bashful, they do chesed, right? And they have compassion for others. As we say, Rachmanim Baishanim Gimus Chasadim, right? They have compassion for others, get embarrassed easily, right? They have this trait of bashfulness. And they do chesed, do unbelievable acts of loving kindness to others. So that is going to guarantee humility. That is 100% is going to prevent them to sin, right? If they get embarrassed, if they have humility, because the opposite, as the Chovos Levavos in Duties of the Heart says, he brings down, how do you overcome arrogance? What is the solution to overcome arrogance? That is to go to the opposite extreme. What's the opposite of arrogance? Humility. Right? And, we have to be humble over here. Doesn't matter what we accomplish. Doesn't matter what we've done. The Mishnah Pirkei Avos says in Ethics of Our Fathers, a person should think, a person, if they would say, I learned a lot of Torah. How can they be arrogant? They might have learned a lot of Torah. But the Mishnah Pirkei Avos says, isn't that what you're commanded to do? So, you learned a lot of Torah, very good. You don't learn everything. Many different levels. Right? So you say, but I know more than a lot of people. That might be true. Right? The person gets a fat head, he gets arrogant. But the reality is, as the Chovos Levavos there says, the reality is you don't do a quarter, a third, a tenth of what we're supposed to do. There's so many other things, at different levels we're obligated in. We don't come close. So where's the arrogance? How can a person be arrogant over here? You got to see, God runs the world. Look at the end of the book of Job, last 2 chapters. God says, were you there when I played with the Leviathan? No. Were you there when I did this? No. So it's like, shut up. What are you saying over here? You can't control anything, right? You have no idea what you see. You don't see things in perspective like I do, right? So there's no point over here for arrogance, but we get caught up. We get caught up in all these different things. So what cured the arrogance of the snake, right? What cured it over here? Humility. The person doesn't have humility. Then, by definition, they're not humble. They will be arrogant. 100% they'll be arrogant because there's nothing stopping them, right? That's the antidote. If a person being told, take a professional athlete from the youngest days, They're told how great they are. They're pampered. They're this, they're that. I'm not saying everyone's going to be arrogant, when they hit the top and this and that. A lot of them, I'm sure, are. I don't think there's any question, right? But, I'm not going to say everybody, certainly not. There are people that are humble, but that's the way you destroy arrogance, right? That's the way you beat it. And, you have to be humble. And if you don't want to be humble, right, you're not interested, you still want to think you're God's gift to the world, well, guess what? God can do so many different things to make you humble. You're going to say, well, it happened this way, it happened that way. Yeah, but God runs the world. God's the one in charge, right? And there's so many things we're not in control, as we mentioned, right? So how can someone be arrogant? How in the world can someone be arrogant over here? Again, we'll keep this clean. We mentioned about, a person being in the bathroom. Let's think about how a person's born and where they come from, and how that works. Where's the arrogance? Look where a person comes from. You gotta say, come on, that's natural. You're right. But look in the bigger scheme of things. We understand, biology 101 or 101A. We understand how things work, but think in the bigger picture. This is where a person comes from. You can't do anything on your own. You're pampered for a long time. You can't eat on your own, can't change on your own. All these different things. So you're going to say, okay, but that's the argument on the other side will be, but that's natural. That's the way of the world. You're right. That's the way of the world. But if you think a drop deeper, and you think about what it means, and what it represents, how in the world can a person be arrogant? But nobody thinks in those terms. They just think, look what I've done. Look at me. Look at, I'm in the limelight. So to speak. I'm doing all these, things. It's unbelievable. Yeah, but you forget. You forget very quickly. And if you don't, God is going to show you. God is going to show you. Think you're in control. I'm going to knock you down like this, like that, like the other thing. And you see it, use, I guess when with this, use a sports parable. And a sports parable will use, imagine, and this happens, this happens often. You have an athlete, up for a new contract. 3 years, 4 years, tens of millions of dollars. And what happens? They do something stupid in the off season. They do something stupid. It goes viral. They get caught, and that's it. And they lose it. So imagine they're finally going to get their payday. They're finally going to make, this big contract. And they do something foolish, and they get caught. And now their career's over. No one's going to want to hire them. Can't do commercial. They're in trouble. Have to make a whole new makeover. What are they going to do? They might be flipping burgers at McDonald's, right? What are they going to do over here? They get destroyed, so to speak. So, so what can God do in a split second? What can God do? God can say, you know what? You're so arrogant. You want to think you're God's gift to the world? Okay, I'm going to knock you down this way. I'm going to knock you down that way. I'm going to make you step in a certain way, crush your ankle, you're finished. I'll make this happen, I'll make that happen. Not by accident, right? When, what, where, how, God has many messengers. Many messengers. So the whole point over here, not to get lost in everything, is that, this impurity is unbelievably strong. So now we see what the source is. We see why, Mount Sinai, sort of rectified that. But we see what it has to do with, the fact that it has to do with arrogance, and these other things that cause people to go after, basically, their base desires. And if you don't have the antidote, then a person is just silly putty. I don't know, people still use silly putty today. People are just silly putty, in the hands of Mr. S. So Mr. S has such an easy job today to get people to sin, to get people to go off and, in other things. And once a person hits a certain point, I'm not going to say it's a point of no return, because, a person can always come back. But what's the problem? What's the problem is much harder, much harder once a person's hit a certain level or a certain point, or, whatever the case is. But we need humility. If you don't have humility, then 100%, arrogance is going to run wild. And this is what we're talking about, and what the Rambam, goes through in the Guide for the Perplexed. So I didn't even get to the other things here. So I guess we're going to have a part 4.
We are. We sure are.
We're going to have a part 4, I guess, other great, statements against non-Jews. In the Talmud, speak about saving a non-Jew on Shabbos. Oh, pedophilia. That's going to be fun. Right? We'll speak about that. I guess we'll hit that as well.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button if you're enjoying this video series, and also subscribe, turn on notifications, and I guess we'll see you guys Sunday with Rabbi Tovia Singer. Thank you for your time. Rabbi, you should have a great week, and y'all have a great week as well. Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Thanks. Early. Yay.